Hello friends, welcome to Knowledge India once again. In this tutorial, we are going to talk about IAM Permissions Boundary. Uh, if you have already watched our other security related videos, you can consider that this would be one in that series. If you have not watched it already, please go and check the security playlist in our description section. Now, what is IAM Permissions Boundary? This is a very good feature which can help you you know become really agile in your organization. So we will take an example of how IAM permissions boundary can help you in your organization, to really make the security posture better. Okay, so let us go ahead and first understand some basics around it, and after that we'll get into a problem statement and we'll try to understand that in detail, right? So first of all, what is permissions boundary? Now, if you see that, let's say in your organization, you go ahead and give somebody permission to create an IAM user. So if you give somebody permission to create an IAM user, that person can go ahead and create that user and give him any type of permission he wants, right? He can go ahead and basically just give literally any type of permission. He can even make him admin. Now, somebody might say that, okay, we can go ahead and restrict that user so that he doesn't create new policies. Okay, good. But in that case, how do you handle that? So how do you handle the situation? You would probably say that we can go ahead and write some of the predefined IAM policies and tell this user to just use those policies. But in a big organization, you really do not know that what type of permissions would be required by a particular person or a user. There are so many different AWS services, and depending on what a particular team or a person is working on, he would come and ask you access to different resources and maybe at different levels. So you cannot know it by default, or you cannot know it in advance, right? So if you see on this diagram, what are we talking about? We are saying that uh, if admins go ahead and create some delegated admins, let's say, I give work in my organization to a couple of guys that you would be creating the IAM users whenever a request comes. So that's what I'm referring here as delegated admins, right? So what they will do whenever they are creating an IAM user or role, now with permissions boundary, what they could do, they can attach this permission boundary to the IAM user or IAM role. And what would happen because of that is that IAM user or IAM role which gets created cannot have any permission more than the permission boundary. It's like restricting it, right? So that's how it works. So uh, I will give you full examples around this. This is a further explanation of the same. So before permission boundaries, how things used to work, we need to understand. Certain IAM policy actions, for example, put user policy or attach user policy, are essentially full admin-like permissions. Doing any form of self-service permissions management was non-trivial. What does that mean? Here you think about that delegated admin, the guy to whom you have given permissions to actually create a new IAM user. That guy is literally now equal to you. So if he wants, he can go ahead and create 10 more admin users who will be just having all the rights same as you are having, and you cannot restrict it, right? With permissions boundary, what happens? Though this particular person, the delegated admin, he can go ahead and create a new user, but you can go ahead and enforce that whenever a new user is getting created, that user should have a permissions boundary attached. You may even write the you may even go ahead and write the policies in such a manner that if this delegated user doesn't attach a permissions boundary, the user creation itself would fail. And what does this help? How does this thing help? It helps because now, you know, based on the requirement, this delegated admin can keep on creating different types of users and give them all the permissions. But what is the boundary of permission? How much maximum somebody can do, that you are controlling because you have set up the permissions boundary, right? So let us look at a small example to understand this even better. So here there is a simple example which is given, and it's very good article in the AWS documentation itself. Let's say there is a user called IAM user called Shirley, right? And you want to ensure that this user should be able to deal with only couple of services, right? Let's say S3, CloudWatch, and Amazon EC2. In order to enforce this thing, what we could do is we can go ahead and write a permissions boundary where we are saying S3 colon star, CloudWatch colon star, and EC2 colon star. These three types of actions we are allowing. So basically all the actions in these three services or these three resource types, all the actions are actually allowed. I should say services, not resource. And within these services, all the resources, right? So that is allowed. Now, if you attach this as the permissions boundary to this particular IAM user, what would be the result? Even if you go ahead and further add this type of policy to this user, it won't work. Meaning, in this via this policy, you are saying IAM create user. You are giving the permission to Shirley to go ahead and create new users, right? And that's the policy which you are attaching to Shirley. But because in the IAM permissions boundary, if you see in this permissions boundary, any action related to IAM is not allowed, right? So that's why Shirley would not be able to go ahead and create an IAM user, even though this type of policy is attached to Shirley. So important bit to understand here is that whatever you are attaching, as part of permission boundary, this is basically specifying that what is maximum which could be done by that user. It doesn't really mean that these are the actions which the user would be able to do, but you are just saying maximum this is what this user can do, right? Now, of course, in order to make sure that the user is able to do that, user needs to have policies attached as well. Let me go ahead and show you that thing quickly. So what I'll try to do is I'll try to create a new user called Shirley. So I'll just go ahead and put a name, Shirley. I'll put a quick password. And you see, I can go ahead and give some permission to, to Shirley. And what I'll do is I'll go ahead and give him or her, I'll give her, let's say, even administrator access. So which basically means I'm just allowing everything, right? All the different, permissions I'm giving him or her. Sorry. Um, Now we'll go ahead and just add some tags, but that's fine. We can just leave it. Um, So at this level, you also need to set permissions boundary. Sorry, I missed that. So in the permissions boundary, we can go ahead and write a policy. So let's say create, and what we'll do, we'll go ahead and just apply this one. Okay. So let us go here, go to JSON and just paste this review, and we'll say Shirley permission boundary. All right, so this is the permission boundary which I'm attaching to Shirley. Now, this has been created. Just 1 minute. What we'll need to do is refresh it here and filter it by customer managed. And you should ideally see this one, Shirley underscore PB, say next, next, and just say create user. So this would create this user Shirley, right? So I've set up some password. I know that. What I'll do is, if I show you, she has got administrator access as such. But if you see in permissions boundary, only these three things are allowed. So we can go ahead and very well check, right? What I'll do is I'll just go ahead and log in using Shirley, and we will try to see that are we able to do any other actions other than S3, CloudWatch, or EC2. Okay, so let me log in using that particular user. Guys, so as you can see, I'm logged in with this particular IAM user called Shirley, and what I'll do is I'll try to just visit IAM dashboard. Okay, let's do that. What I'll also do is I'll try to visit EC2, right? So let us see. As you can see, I just get errors, right? That's because even though Shirley has got administrator access, but because of permissions boundary, she can only do S3, EC2, and probably CloudWatch, right? Those three things. So let us go and see EC2. There is no problem. You know, everything is visible. If I want, I can go ahead and launch an instance as well. That won't be an issue. In the same way, if I go and try to see S3, that also I should be able to see. There should not be any problem. Anyway, so that's how the permission boundary works. So that's the basic premise which I wanted to explain you, right? Now let us go ahead further and try to dig a bit deeper into this. In your organization, you have engaged a vendor who's going to manage your AWS state, and this vendor team takes care of creating IAM users and roles whenever a request comes in their queue, right? Now, if you want them to create IAM users or roles, surely you need to give them IAM permissions, right? So which would mean that these guys can go ahead and create a user with a read-only permission as well. They can go ahead and create a user with admin permissions as well, right? Both the things are possible. But then what is your requirement? Your requirement is you would like to enforce certain restrictions on any IAM user. For example, there are certain buckets, S3 buckets within your account, which contain really important and sensitive data, and you would not want anybody to go ahead and probably view those S3 buckets or probably delete those S3 buckets. You would not want anybody to do that, right? So that is one thing. In that way, you might have even more number of requirements. So you need a way to achieve this. How would you do that? Because see, you cannot just take a risk, right? Let's say this vendor team just misses someday and creates a user with admin permissions. Then what would happen? This guy can go ahead and actually delete that sensitive S3 bucket, right? But you would not want that. So how do you ensure, how do you enforce that such miss doesn't happen? So there are a couple of options which we have. We can go ahead and use service control policy. Maybe we can write a policy from the top and just say, okay, on this particular S3 bucket, there should not be any access and things like that. We can do that. Number one option. We can go ahead and write explicit deny statements in the policy attached to the identity. So, what we could do is we can go ahead and, pre-write, or basically we can go ahead and create the necessary policies beforehand. And we just tell this particular vendor team to use those created policies only. And with that, they should go ahead and create new users. But, this solution may work, but the problem is you cannot go ahead and imagine all the possible scenarios which are required, and you cannot go ahead and write all the possible permissions beforehand. That's really impossible, right? So that's the problem with that particular approach. With SCP, yes, you may go ahead and do that and you can achieve it, but the problem is SCP should be used more around things which you want to do in multiple accounts, something which you want to restrict in multiple accounts. Probably you should use SCP for that. Also, SCPs have got some limit that how many SCPs you can apply at a particular level, right? So I think at an OU level you can apply maximum 5 SCPs. So you need to think a bit and really decide that what are those controls which you would like to enforce via SCP, right? Whereas this particular you know a restriction which we're talking about, this is something which you would like to do within one account. So for this, IAM permissions boundary is really the right solution, right? So we will go ahead and take this scenario and try to discuss it in detail, and also we will quickly try to understand that these different things like SCP, IAM permissions boundary, uh, policies which are attached to an entity, resource level policy, how does all these things come together and work really? Okay, so in order to explain you this thing, I have first put a very simple diagram so that you are clear with the characters in this particular case study. So on first we have got Maria. Maria is the company admin. Okay, so for this particular company, Maria is the admin, so which means she should have all the rights. I mean, unrestricted, right? You in any organization, you will have couple of people whom you will give all the rights, and you basically trust them they are your employees and you trust that they will not just go ahead and execute something incorrect. Also, you would not actually expect from Maria that she should be involved in day-to-day operations. She should have all the rights, but you will probably ask Maria to get into the system when there is something, in basically in very rare cases, right? In such cases, you will go ahead and ask Maria to do something, but otherwise, not. I mean, she's not going to just operate on day-to-day basis. So we have the next person called Zhang. Zhang is the team member of the service provider, right? You remember we talked about the service provider, so Zhang is a team member there. And what basically we have decided as part of this organization is that Zhang would be the person who would be given necessary permissions, right? So that he can create new IAM users or roles, right? So that's what we have decided. So any request comes that we want 5 new IAM users, Zhang will execute that. Okay, great. And then the third part, Nikhil. Nikhil is another guy, or you can think of another IAM user, which has been created by Zhang, right? So a request came and Zhang created an IAM user called Nikhil. So these are characters in our case study, and we will go ahead and now look at it in detail. So delegating responsibility to others using permission boundaries. Um, Here, if you see, you can use permissions boundaries to delegate permissions management tasks such as user creation to IAM users in your account. This permits others to perform tasks on your behalf with a specific boundary of permissions in place. So Maria is the administrator, which we already talked. What she wants to delegate user creation duties to Zhang, and however, she must ensure that Zhang creates users that adhere to the following company rules. So here is the restriction which I'm talking about, right? We said that we will allow Zhang to create users, but he cannot just create a user who will have unrestricted rights. No, we are setting up permission boundaries. So what would happen? Any user which Zhang creates will have some restriction, right? Meaning certain things that particular user would not be able to do. What are those? Users cannot use IAM to create or manage users groups, roles or policies. The user which Zhang creates, those users would not be able to do anything related to IAM. They cannot go ahead and create further users. So what does that mean? This guy Nikhil, he would not be able to go ahead and create any more IAM users, policies, roles, etc. Right? Only Zhang has been given that permission. Okay. Users are denied access to Amazon S3 logs bucket and cannot access this particular EC2 instance. So two more restrictions are there. One bucket which is called logs and another EC2 instance. This is its ID. These two resources should not be accessible to these newly created users. That means Nikhil cannot go ahead and in any case, Nikhil cannot go ahead and access that EC2 instance. When I say access that EC2 instance, it means via AWS it cannot access, which means it cannot stop it, it cannot reboot it, it cannot terminate it, all such things. No AWS actions Nikhil would be able to do. In the same way, for the S3 bucket called logs as well. Okay, moving ahead, what is the other restriction? Users cannot remove their own boundary policies, because we are gonna actually enforce these things by the help of permission boundaries only. So what do we want to ensure? Nikhil should not be able to remove his own, his own boundary policy, because if he does that, he would be able to do a lot more things. So that's the third thing which we want to deny. Okay, so those are three things which we want to deny for the end user. So to enforce these rules, Maria completes the following tasks for which details are included below. Maria creates X company boundaries, which is a managed policy to use as a permissions boundary for all new users in the account. See, you need to understand, guys, that when you write a new permissions boundary, it is not at all different from writing an IAM policy, right? How we write an IAM policy, same grammar you use to write a permissions boundary as well, right? But remember, when you go ahead and attach a policy as permissions boundary, with that you are basically saying this is the maximum which you can do, nothing more than that. Okay, so Maria will create one such policy called X company boundaries, in which she will take care of these things. Maria creates the delegated user boundary managed policy and assigns it as permissions boundary for Zang, right? Why is it required? Because uh, there are certain things where Maria wants to stop Zang as well, or wants to actually enforce on Zang that you should do certain things in certain manner. For example, think about this. If Zang creates an IAM user and doesn't attach a permission boundary to that IAM user, what would happen? Then basically this guy Nikhil can go ahead and do anything, right? So what Maria would like to do is Maria would write the policy for Zang in such a manner that he will have to apply the permissions boundary. That is very important. If he doesn't apply the permissions boundary, the user creation will fail. Okay, so we'll look at all of that, right? And in addition to that, Maria also wants to ensure that Zang should not be able to affect Maria in any way, because see, once you give IAM permissions to Zang can literally go ahead and actually delete Maria's user as well, right? Or basically change Maria's permissions as well. So Maria wants to protect protect her user from that as well, right? Because anyway, Zang belongs to a different organization, isn't it? So let's go ahead and try to understand here. Maria creates the delegated user boundary managed policy and assigns it as permissions boundary to Zang. We will just review this quickly. Maria makes a note of her admin IAM users ARN and uses it in the policy to prevent Zang from accessing it. That's what I was telling you. Zang should not be able to change Maria's user at all. Maria creates delegated user permissions managed policy and attaches it as a permissions policy for Zang. So she has created two things for Zang. Delegated user permissions is managed policy which is attached to Zang. So basically this particular policy will say that what all Zang can do, right? Whereas delegated user boundary, this will define maximum what Zang can do. Like this will form the boundary. Now after this, Maria tells to Zang that what are your responsibilities. You need to create a new IAM user whenever request comes, right? So let us quickly review that what all Maria has really done, right? So as you can see, this is the X company boundaries. The first permission boundary which we talked about. Don't get confused. This is the permission boundary for the end users, like for Nikhil, you can think, right? So what all has she written in that? If you see here, in permissions boundary, S3 star, CloudWatch star, EC2 star, and DynamoDB star. All these four services, all the actions are allowed. You can see here, right? So this is first thing. So that means Nikhil would be able to do these things at maximum. In addition to that, that user would also be allowed to list the IAM users and get account password policy. Basically he can see what is the password policy. He cannot change it, but he can just see what is the password policy. Next thing is allow manage own password and access keys. If let's say the password expires, so this guy would be able to generate or basically set up the new password. He would also be able to create an access key, secret key for himself. How are we ensuring that he is able to do only for himself? By writing this particular expression in the resource. So you see, when you write $AWS username, it means whichever user is currently logged in, that user's username would appear here. So if Nikhil is logged in, Nikhil's username would come here, right? Same way, if I am logged in, my username will come there, right? So that way it is. In addition to that, there are certain deny statements written as well. You can see deny S3 log. So deny S3 star for logs bucket. In the same way, deny EC2 star for a particular EC2 instance. So if you remember, these three things were required. A particular logs bucket he should not be able to access. He should not be able to access an EC2 instance. That was number two. And in addition to that, any IAM type of permissions, were not given, because he should not be able to go ahead and just create a new IAM user, right? So as you can see, in the IAM, in the case of IAM, only certain permissions are given, and these permissions or these actions would be applicable only to the user himself, not for other users. So this is the permissions boundary. Okay, now I hope you understood that. Maria then wants to allow Zhang to create all X company users, but only with the X company boundaries permissions boundary. She creates the following customer managed policy called delegated user boundary. So we said delegated user boundary is the policy which will be attached to Zhang user, right? So let's see what all what all permissions Zhang is getting really. Zhang has got allow for IAM create user, delete user policy, attach user policy, detach user policy. Basically, you can literally do most of the things in IAM, right? You can create a new user, you can attach a policy, everything. But there is a condition which is put. Condition is string equals IAM colon permission boundary that X company boundaries. So this condition has been put, which means he can go ahead and create a user, but only when he has applied this permission boundary. If he doesn't apply this permission boundary, then user creation would fail. So basically, if you see, in a very beautiful way, we have now enforced it on Zhang that yes, I'm allowing you to create IAM users, okay, but unless until you attach this permission boundary, user creation would fail, right? So that would enforce Zhang that he will create users in a proper manner. And when Nikhil gets created, Nikhil will automatically have the permissions boundary attached. And hence, Nikhil would not be able to do certain things which Maria doesn't want Nikhil to do, that part. But at the same time, if you see, Zhang has got all the Zhang has got all the permission to give any type of permissions to Nikhil. For example, Nikhil may come and ask, give me permission for EC2 stop instances, start instances, and launch instances. So Zhang can write a custom policy of, according to Nikhil's requirement and just give that much permission to Nikhil. That is perfectly possible. But at any given point of time, if Zhang tries to be very generous and, gives all the permissions to Nikhil, at that time, permissions boundary will just cut it, because Nikhil cannot do anything more than what is given in the permissions boundary, right? I hope you are following till this point. All right, let us see what else Zhang has got. Zhang has also got some permissions like IAM get user. These are more like read type of things. Some places you also have delete policy, create policy. So many of the IAM permissions are there. But if you see what has been written here, instead of resource here, not resource has been used. What does that mean? Not resource means this particular block, this particular block is applicable to all the resources, but except this resource. So if you see, what was our requirement? Zhang should be able to do everything on IAM, but he should not be able to touch Maria's user. So that's why all the permissions are given, but it is written not resource, and then Maria's ARN is given for the Maria IAM user, right? So he would not be able to change Maria's permissions at all. If you are in an organization where you have given permissions to to a vendor, you may go ahead and implement this, and hence really ensure that a vendor team member is not able to come and actually delete your users itself, right? All right, let's move ahead. You can see there are also certain deny statements written here, like deny IAM create policy version, delete policy version, set default policy version. So, and this is written for which things? X company boundaries and delegated user boundary. So the two boundaries, which Maria has created, she has also written that Zhang would not be able to do anything to these two. So that's why a deny is written for these two things. In addition to that, if you see, there is also IAM delete user permission boundary. this also has been denied. So see, it should not be it should not happen that Zhang first creates a user with the permission boundary, but later on he goes and just deletes the permission boundary. So that also we need to stop, right? So that's why this particular thing has been done this way. You might ask me that, let's say we want to change permission boundary or something like that. So that would be possible. There is a different action for putting the permission boundary, right? So that is allowed, but he cannot delete the permission boundary. Moreover, while creating, this has been enforced that he has to, it is a must that he has to use this particular permission boundary. So he cannot go with anything else. He has to ensure that he follows this, guys. Right? This is like really interesting. If you are operating in a big organization, this is just a fantastic stuff, right? So okay, we understood about the permissions which have which we have given to Zhang. Let us just quickly look at the permissions boundary of Zhang as well. So what is the permission boundary of Zhang? Let us see. uh, IAM, I mean, this is just statement ID, allow IAM star. He has all the permissions to do everything in IAM, right? But if you see in Zhang's case, certain things Maria has restricted in Zhang's policy itself, right? This is the policy which is attached to Zhang, and this is the permissions boundary. Let us see what else is there in the permissions boundary. Uh, CloudWatch related permissions are given, like allow CloudWatch get dashboard, etc. for everything. Uh, it is also allowed. There is a particular bucket which is just created for Zhang called Zhang bucket. So there is also some list bucket permission only given for that, right? But really, he won't be able to do much in this particular Zhang bucket. In case of Zhang, what she has done is that whatever she wanted to restrict for Zhang, she has restricted in this managed policy itself, right? And she has also enforced that Zhang, unless until you use this thing as the permissions boundary while creating an IAM user, you won't be able to create it, right? Okay, so we follow till this point. So moving ahead, let us see. This part we have discussed. Now she gives Zhang instructions to create a new user. She tells him that he can create new users with any permissions that they need. Any permission. She can go ahead, I mean, Zhang can go ahead and create a custom permission, but he must assign them the X company boundaries policy as a permissions boundary. If he doesn't provide this thing, then the user creation would fail. So Zhang creates a user called Nikhil, which is what we have seen here. Zhang creates a user called Nikhil, okay, and enables console access for this user. And what does he do further? Zhang chooses IAM full access, gives IAM full access, okay, and Amazon S3 read only access. He gives these two things to Nikhil. Zhang tries to skip the set permission boundary. Then if it tries to create the user, it will fail, right? Because we understand why. Then what he does, he comes back and sets up the permission boundary, chooses this thing and creates the user. Then Nikhil gets created. Nikhil user gets created. But you have to understand that what would Nikhil be able to do, right? In order to understand that, we should look at the first permission boundary which is written, which is this one, X company boundaries. If you see here, only permissions are there for S3, CloudWatch, EC2, and DynamoDB, right? In IAM, the permissions are there only for list users and get account password policy, or this guy can change his own password, access key, etc. Right? So this is what it is. And for S3 logs bucket, there is a specific deny. There is an S3 star also given, but for logs bucket, there is a deny. So let us see what happens with Nikhil then. When Nikhil signs in, he has access to IAM and Amazon S3, okay, because these are the two things which Zhang has given to this guy. S3 read-only access and IAM full access, except those operations that are denied by the permissions boundary, right? For example, he can change his own password in IAM, but he can't create another user or edit his policies. That's what we want. Nikhil has read-only access to Amazon S3. Great. I think we understood till this point. What we have explained till this point is that how Maria actually wrote a policy for Zhang with which Maria empowered Zhang to create IAM users, but enforced that whenever you are creating an IAM user, you should apply a particular permissions boundary, and that permissions boundary Maria has written already, and also Maria ensures that Zhang is not able to affect Maria's user, plus Zhang is not able to delete those permission boundaries or modify those permission boundaries. So that's all it is done, right? Now, one important thing to understand here is that permissions boundary do not apply to resource based policy, that you need to remember. For example, if there is a particular uh, there is a particular S3 bucket, and on that S3 bucket there is some bucket policy which has been put, and via that bucket policy some extra permissions are being given to Nikhil, so that cannot be stopped by permissions boundary. That you need to understand. The resource based policy, resource based policy is, doesn't get affected by the permissions boundary. But you should not get confused here. Okay, let's take an example. uh, Nikhil has got S3 read only access, right? So that means he cannot go ahead and put any object in any of the S3 bucket. Now let's say there are two buckets. One bucket is called logs, there's another bucket called bucket 1, for example. Now for logs, even if somebody goes and adds a resource based policy, which means a bucket policy in the logs bucket, even after that Nikhil won't be able to do anything, because in permissions boundary you have got a deny, right? You have got a deny, for the logs bucket, so there it will protect. But let's say for the other bucket called bucket 1, for that, if additional policy, some bucket policy is written specifically for Nikhil, which allows Nikhil actions like put object, then Nikhil would be able to do that. Because you see, in Nikhil's permission boundaries, only one deny is written, and that is there for the logs bucket, right? Other than that, a deny is not written. So that's where I was trying to tell you, even though Nikhil doesn't have in his IAM policy, Nikhil is not having S3 put object permission. But if a particular resource, a resource based policy is giving that permission uh, to Nikhil, that would be possible. So on the bucket 1, if in the bucket 1 bucket policy you go ahead and write that, okay, I am allowing Nikhil to do put object, then Nikhil would be able to do that. But that would not be possible for logs bucket. Okay. uh, all right, so I think we have mostly covered it. We'll spend 5 more minutes to explain you certain scenarios additionally. This will make your concept even more clear, right? So you see, there is a user, there is some policy which is attached to that user, that is identity based policy, like a managed policy which you attach to an IAM user, and you also attach a permissions boundary. So what would he be able to do effectively? Basically whatever is the intersection of both, right? For example, let's say, I'll take a simple example. In the identity based policy, I give permission to a user saying that EC2 star I can allow. But in the permissions boundary, if I just say allow EC2 colon start and EC2 colon stop instances, right? Start instances and stop instances. So basically, because in the permission boundary, the maximum which I'm allowing is only start and stop, what would be the end result for this guy? It would be that he can only do start and stop of EC2 instance. He cannot terminate, he cannot launch, even though EC2 colon star was given to that particular user, right? So you need to understand this intersection part. And of course, if anything is written as deny anywhere, whether it is written as an explicit deny here or here, then the result is going to be denied. That part you guys already know. So resource-based policies we just now discussed. I think you guys should be clear with that. Let us quickly discuss about when SCP also comes into picture. So see, when SCP also comes into picture, now you have three things, right? Via SCP, you might allow something, right? You might be allowing something, and then via policy which is attached to the user, which is identity-based policy, via that you are allowing something, and via permissions boundary you are allowing something. So whatever is common between between all the three, that only those actions would be permissible to this particular user. You need to understand that. Okay. And of course, any explicit deny statement will surely override any allow for that particular action. Remember that part. But when these three things come together, the intersection of the three you will have to see. Okay. So I will go ahead and end this video at this point. I hope you learned something from this particular video. This video is a bit long because it requires a lot of discussion, and I would also leave that particular link in the description, which I used to explain you. That's a very good article written by AWS, but I tried to explain it probably in simple manner so that you guys can understand it. If you like this video, you may go ahead and share it with your friends, and if you want to support our work, go ahead and press the join button which you see at the bottom. We will meet you very soon with a new video on AWS or maybe Azure. All right, guys, so take care, keep learning. Bye bye.